Hello everyone, this is Denise Wilbanks, and today I have Bryan Onley with me. He is the author and producer of The Book of Man, and I'm delighted to have you join me, Bryan, even though we can't quite see you, but I appreciate you taking the time to join me and answer a few questions and give a little bit of a background as to the work that you've done in the Book of Man. So thank you. Tell me a little bit about you right now, if that's okay. That would give an intro to who you are and what you've done as it pertains to the Book of Man, and what inspired you to do this type of work.
Well, thank you, Denise, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me. Um, it's not very often that we get to share details of this nature with the folks, so it's an opportunity, and thank you again for it. As far as myself is concerned, I come from a very narrow background. I was born into a United States military family, and I traveled extensively growing up, so I had the opportunity to see a great many things in a great many places. And so I was not necessarily indentured to a specific location or a community paradigm, so to speak. And throughout my years growing up, I basically learned how to pay careful attention to a lot of things. And over the course of time, as I became an adult, I I basically looked into a lot of outside the mainstream information that was becoming available several years before the inception of the internet. And over the course of time, I collected a considerable amount of information, which at the time appeared to be of interest, though no real use. And as far as this relates to the Book of Man, this information would later play an important role, though not until I realized it many, many years later. Um, I am not sure at this point at how much further you would like me to go with that, but um, that's a quick up to speed version.
Right. Well, that summarizes. And in the Book of Man, you do create a very nice intro in relationship to how you gather the data. So let's just go right into a summary of what the Book of Man is, and that's kind of a loaded question. Obviously, you have you know packed full of information. These, and I'm trying to correct me if I'm wrong. Was it 11 or 12 series altogether?
Um, there are 13 individual segments to
Okay,
the book, but there are actually only 10 chapters of the actual story.
got it.
Um, but as far as the nature of the book, uh, this in essence is can be classified as history 101. I mean, yes, there is a great deal of information here. Um, some of it very well known, some of it very well researched by a great many people who have an incredibly far reaching and farther depth of field than I do. But in this particular instance, this is generally meant to be directed into what can be referred to as sort of a third density story, specifically for the reason for people who aren't aware of this information, who have any concept of any of the existence of this information, or how it pertains in the broader picture. And I think that's was the driving essence behind the book in the first place.
Let me backtrack a little bit because you utilize a word there that not everybody may or may not be familiar with. But third density, obviously we understand the third dimension as in height, width, and so uh, if you can give a little bit overview about what third density is, because there are other densities. So are you can you do that? Can you help the listener understand that?
Oh, well, to some small degree, of course. I mean, our perceptual version of what we see and understand at this point in time with most people and most of us on this planet is very limited in our capacity to have this information equate to certain things on a higher level. Uh, there has been certain topics and certain discussions of the understanding of certain different groups of people here. And certain people understand only to a certain level. Others have understanding that supersedes that and goes beyond that. And each of us in our own individual unique ways and manners acquire this information, perceive it, and deal with it. And so I guess in the short version of that explanation, rather than try to make an expansive volume of information here available, crossing many levels of understanding, it was easily constructed to keep it at the simplest level for the most, well, I don't wish to use the term, but the lowest common denominator. And that was for those who, as I said, just did not have a grasp of this information.
Right. So basically, you got to start somewhere. You can't get there from here if you don't just simply start. So I get it. I get your intent in that respect. So, and I'm kind of torn between, asking questions that are so elaborate that may hinder someone's desire to actually just jump in and to go see the Book of Man, and still being, covering enough. So if you, can understand the quandary, because like I said, I don't want to give it away. It's almost like telling the end to a very good movie or a story. You don't want to give it away, but at the same time you want to whet the palate in such a way that it entices, people to just seek for themselves. And so that's kind of where I'm at the moment in asking you questions, Bryan. And let's just go ahead and if you can do a brief summary, so to speak, of each section perhaps, because as I see it, you've backtracked all the way to the inception of, not just the inception of man, but what preceded. And I don't know, if that's kind of going to be of any value here. But so I'll leave it up to your discretion if you want to backtrack all the way down there. I just want to be able to give an understanding of what the Book of Man really is.
Well, and I appreciate that. Point of fact is that each individual chapter, and I mentioned this in the introduction, that each chapter is an individual narrative, which can potentially stand on its own as just a unique story. But the overall connection between the chapters is the important part, I think. Basically, yes, it does go back considerably further than most historical records go. Going back to the concept, just telling the story from the very beginning was probably the most difficult starting point, because it covers an area of knowledge that we have available, actually. And the easiest way to present this information, it seemed to me, to take it from a fairly narrow conservative standpoint from a historical perspective and tell it that way, rather than delve into esoteric matters.
Yeah, and I certainly could see that. And one of the things I appreciated the most of how you established those parameters was that you didn't involve current political frame of references, which in other interviews it has been difficult for me to keep it focused, because there were so many other branches that were intertwined And that somewhat dilutes the understanding, or it dilutes the focus of why, where, when, and so forth, in terms of being able, for the average person to be able to understand how all these things interplay in the big picture. So you've hats off to you, because I think you really did deliver that through focus. You deliver that understanding. So, with that said, what is it that you hope to accomplish, or what is it that you want people to be able to take away from the summary or of the information?
Well, basically, I initially, during the construction of the book, I was torn between what is it that just like you said, what is it that I am willing to tell, and what is it that needs to be told? And I think I will fall back to a philosophical position of my own, that you cannot give anyone any information that will give them any enlightenment or any forward positive steps forcibly. In other words, it's up to each individual to draw from certain pieces of information and do their own work on their own in order to achieve that understanding. And that's part and parcel of what the book is about. It is, in essence, an individual's task to draw from this work what they find or deem necessary to them, and then proceed with their own research into the material, go deeper into it. Those holes are left wide open for anyone to pursue that. And basically, the basis of the information is generic and general enough to allow anyone to get a lot further from this than what is being presented.
Absolutely, I see that. And to chime in right behind you, I believe that your outlook or your philosophy, as you've just shared, is true for any field. I mean, I just to kind of interject from my own perspective, my work is in more metaphysical and spirituality, but the same goes even for that. You cannot interject anything to anyone that is not ready or willing to look in and to sort of almost put their beliefs aside, at least even temporarily, to open up to greater understanding. If you just simply continue to block every piece of data that comes, your way with certain types of beliefs, and just say, talk to the hand, there's just absolutely no way that you can transcend any kind of state of mind, or even in a spiritual way, or even in understanding of what's surrounding you politically, because you're just blocked. So I give a lot of credence to what you just said.
And if I might interject, I made a specific point of drawing a clear distinction between the words believe and understanding. And I did that on purpose because it is my own personal, and I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, belief, that the word believe has been misused over a considerable amount of time around here. And that is the fact that people fall back to, oh, you really believe that? Or do you believe this? Or do you believe that? When in fact what they mean is, do you understand that? And I think that's an argumentative position in some cases, albeit maybe correct. But in actuality, I think myself that it should be a modern era movement to start escaping from the paradigm of belief to the paradigm of understanding. Because I think once you cross that threshold, now you're entering an entirely different realm, because you are no longer withheld by the fallacy of the word belief, because that can be thrown in many different directions for different reasons.
Oh, absolutely. But even if semantically you extract the word believe, the underlying mechanics still take over, and the underlying mechanics basically is just the function of how we attain these notions and these concepts, and how we basically, hold on to them for dear life. So, I'm with you. I'm with you in that if you extract the word belief and you put understanding, which is really knowledge, and so basically we go back to the axiom, knowledge is power. Even so, there is some underlying function of the human brain, so to speak, or the ability to process information, that if we are not in a position of willingness or openness, it's just not going to come in. And funny, the funny thing is, though, Bryan, that part of our makeup through the history of the Book of Man made it so that we're that way. I mean, if you look at the composition of the brain, the first brain is the lizard brain. So it is the lizard brain in many respects that has made it so that we have that particular first layer of block that inhibits us to just launch into greater understanding at times.
And yes, the throughout the course of the work, the simplicity of the story was entirely constructed on purpose in that manner to sidestep the question of belief to that of understanding. I mean, the language was specifically chosen throughout the entire work solely for that purpose. And that by the end of the material, if you had done your due diligence, you would have at least accepted that point, that now we have crossed the threshold of belief, and that there is an understanding in the depths of our traditions and history and even our remote mythology that purports something higher and something more important. And I think at the end of the day, that without getting redundant and reusing the same phrases, that is the direction it was taking in the first place. And I hope in some small way that people understand that.
I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope so. And obviously it's not for us to to determine that, but that would be my hope. So the question is what, and you please understand I didn't make any preparation of questions here, because I believe that this is something fluid, and so you're willing to jump in with any other input without necessarily waiting on a question from my part. But I guess what I'm most curious about is from the perspective of an individual who has had no influence whatsoever, or no anticipation of this information before. In other words, they've never seen anything like this before. What is it that you hope that they would take away?
That is a difficult question, because obviously it's individually based, and one cannot account for either individual opinions or taste. But it was my goal that the information should be broad enough to at least generate a modicum of interest in even minute details in some way, shape, or form to promote debate, open debate, by the way. I've already received several comments arguing certain specific portions of the work, and they are fully well-founded, by the way. This work wasn't meant to ignore or leave out interesting or important topics or certain discussion points or even valid research archival data. But it was, again, to promote an individual's further study of portions of this story to not only justify it, but to start moving people towards thinking about just a little bit more serious matters than just the simple day-to-day redundancy of it.
That makes sense. And by the way, who is, I mean, you've said the demographic, by the way, I'm just curious. And obviously this is, very open-ended in terms of, I think this is very important to everybody. But it stands to logic that's, or at least to me, that certain demographic have greater interest in this type of data than others. Have you been able to pinpoint any particular area of that respect?
Well, as far as what is considered current mainstream demographics, which is based off of age groups, sex, job type, that kind of thing, no. I am absolutely not interested in that type of demographic. What I am interested in, though, is the broad viewership from what locations they are coming from. And there is a set of interesting numbers, which has actually surprised me over the last several months since the final release of the full work. And it appears that I'm getting a considerable number of views from, obviously the United States and the UK and Canada, of course. A lot of views are coming from there because this is an English language text and therefore, easily identifiable and understandable. But I'm getting a considerable volume of viewership from places that I would have never expected it to come from. As in, say, for instance, Saudi Arabia. I'm getting a lot of viewership from Turkey, from Russia, India. Interestingly enough, places which, coincidentally, are directly involved with the basis of the story.
Right. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I would hope that there's some sort of divine inspiration, for lack of a better word. That's simply just what's coming to the tip of my tongue, so rolling out with it in terms of being able to make some correlations as to what's currently happening into those particular regions, and in essence what's been causing it, that dissonance, which is not completely, yes, obviously we need to take responsibility for our actions and what happens and what we do, but this underlying current of energy that is somewhat being hidden from plain sight, that in many ways has caused this ruffle. Do you want to comment to that?
Yes, and I have to agree with you. It is my personal opinion that from my own personal experiences and what I have seen and had to live through in my own little way on this planet, is that basically and inherently people are who they are. They are what they are. People are not their governments. and governments are definitely not their people. And I find a much more serious and a sincere connectivity with people on the ground and in the street than anywhere else than I've ever seen before. I've been personally lucky to have had personal and close experiences with many great ethnic backgrounds and differing growth opportunities from across the world. And by and large, that has always fascinated me, how so different can we be, and yet at the same time, how similar we are.
I experience that day in and day out, and that part is probably the thing that keeps me going. That's the one thing that keeps me getting up in the morning and saying, I'm doing this again today. Because at the essence of our being, we're so alike. And it's the kind of thing that I wake up sometimes and scratch my head and say, okay, if we are so alike, then why do we turn against each other?
Well, there are inherent problems also down there that I may have only danced around at the tip of the iceberg in the work. Although, as a last straw, I basically threw the glove down at the end of the postscript. And if you sat through it long enough to catch that last sentence,
I
then
did.
it should be obvious that there is indeed on our little world here a collective of those who will stand out in public and denounce, who are actively and mistakenly on the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
And it is unfortunate. They are us as well.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, that's what it is. And we have to deal with that. That's a topic for an entirely different work, which I'm sure could be covered by many great people other than myself. And it should be, actually. I think so. There are plans in the works at the moment. I spoke about this, about a potential sequel, bringing it up to the current present period. And in there, I would be forced to more closely recognize that element. And at this moment, I'm a little on the fence about that, because we've already seen what has happened for those who draw the ire of those folks, and that is not the goal. The goal is not to drag them kicking and screaming into the light, so to speak, but is to move the rest of us towards the light in the most efficient manner. And I think that's where we should inherently aim our focus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you, because I think you end up creating a greater degree of resistance and separation by doing that.
And of course, and though I am sure there's an element of our fellow humans here that they would long for someone to do that. Once again, I'll fall back to my earlier position that it's up to each individual to acquire this information and deal with it on their own personal level, that based off of how the outcome of the work ended at the point the book was ended,
Mm-hmm.
basically explained the very same exact paradigm, that everything is pretty much in a standoff at the moment. There is no resolution. There is no end stage. There is no final conclusion to any of it. Not at this point that we know of. I mean, there may be things going on behind the scenes, but we don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it's anyone's single place to stand up and identify or pinpoint or shed some spotlight on a specific instance of wrongdoing around us, when it's simply our goal to move forward. Because unless we move forward, then we're going to be living under that same paradigm for eternity.
Absolutely.
And that is a pain.
Absolutely.
That's a painful thought.
It's a hamster cage that it's a never ending, just vicious circle. So unless you're able to just say, okay, this is where the buck stops, and I'm taking responsibility. I hear exactly what you're saying. So, along that vein, how do you see us moving forward? And obviously, it's a broad question because, as you said, it's up to each individual. But say, for instance, from your own perspective, if others were in your shoes, in your physical shoes, how is it that you move forward?
I wouldn't suggest anyone get in my own shoes, but I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
Actually, uh,
I guess the
let's say,
question.
for instance,
Go ahead.
what I was going to say was, and let me reiterate this too, for commonality's sake, there are several folks scattered across this globe right now who have an incredible talent, understanding, and vision of researching in depth some of this particular material far beyond anything that I have achieved to this point. And, and
Bryan, I'm losing you.
if it were me,
There you
I
are.
would rely on them to follow up. Yeah, I'm on Wi-Fi, so it's going to be intermittent.
There you go.
Um,
You're fine.
but what I was going to say was that at some point in time, I think it's everyone's course to follow their own path of research, development, and understanding in whichever way it is that interests them. It has nothing to do with a specific topic or direction. There's no sense in trying to direct people. That's not the goal. Because I've discovered over time that the most astounding discoveries in information have come from the most unlikely sources. That, I think, is the essence of the entire idea, is that get out there, start picking up information. It doesn't matter how obscure, very little detail there is, whether there's a working parameter that you have to go on. Just collect it, deal with it, work it. And I think you'll be amazed at the things you uncover simply by performing that simple little act. You're not on an effort to produce some astounding universal truth, although you may by accident. And I think that's part of it.
And what I would interject to that is, that's all well and good, but at the same time, I think at least with me, the way I find it, it's not just about information in general, but there needs to be a parallel of work that's self-inner work, because information in and of itself is sometimes so broad, but if you're not able to implement it on a level of understanding that it's on a cellular level, in other words, what does that information do for me? Or what is it that I have learned about myself as a result of this information? Then if there's no sort of cross-reference, then the information is just information. It has no value.
I agree, Denise. That's maybe I didn't say it.
No. You said
enough.
You said it well. You said it very well, and I followed you. So I want to make sure you didn't take it as a criticism of my part.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, the individual perception and working of the acquisition of new information is a given. That should almost not have to be stated, really. Sure, I mean, maybe there's some real anal retentive types out there whose sole goal is just to collect information with absolutely no fundamental purpose whatsoever. There are those out there.
Yeah.
They, too, can be utilized as a resource in some way, shape, or form, even though, personally, they are not empowering themselves through that acquisition. But individually, those who get it are going to get it one way or the other. That's my opinion.
Well, I suppose, with all due respect to those who we're mentioning, and no judgment here, I guess part of it, and I could speak for myself in that regard, is when you're not ready, you're just not ready. It's like, again, the old axiom: when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. And we're not ready all at the exact same time. I guess life experiences and events and maturity and on, and simply just opening up your eyes. Some of us are so impregnated in this physical illusion that we can't even begin to step into the spiritual aspect, meaning we are just consumed by what we're consuming, the McDonald's, the sugar, the whatnot, and we just basically saturated this vessel with empty something that does not allow us to see the inner side, which is really the side that purports, like as you said, that information for it to be fluid and understandable.
Well, Denise, thank you for bringing that up. I actually had that comment in my notes here. I was going to bring it up, but since you did, we'll run with it.
Cheers. I've got a little water here.
When you're not ready, believe me, and trust me when I say this out loud and in public, that 99.9% of the information within the Book of Man was acquired long before I had any knowledge or understanding of it. It made no sense to me. This is why I drew this analogy in the introduction with the film Contact and the collection of that data. It's because it makes no sense. The individual relevance of the elements eludes us. And that's the truth of it. I was not ready yet to see the importance or the necessity of it. And only after, through the due course of time, did the direction of where this was going started to become evident. Now, does that mean the collection of information is a useless endeavor? No, I don't think so. I mean, let's face it. There are, even to this day, I do this. I collect information which appears to me on the surface to be absolutely irrelevant. But I save it. I put it back somewhere. Because I already realize at some point in time it's going to hit me in the forehead like a ball bat. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to sell the collection of information as a useless, meat-eating developmental stage for some unintended purpose. It's just simply as a sort of like a workbook, a collection of a project that is yet to be determined. Yeah. And I think that is the goal. I may be very bad at trying to get that across,
but you know, Bryan, what's interesting to me about what you're saying, it has somewhat of a metaphysical explanation in it. Let me just sort of interject the way I see it, or at least the way I perceive it or understanding. Every piece of data, everything in the universe carries its own signature of frequency or vibration. So when you're coming in contact, if you yourself are set to a specific vibration, we are vibration. So if you're coming in contact with information that is kin to your vibration, then it's going to impact you in some sort of way. You may not understand it at the time when you're reading it or looking at it, but you kind of get the sense that, boy, this is important. And that's simply because, the law of attraction in of itself has matched you with the vibration of that information. So I find it really interesting what you're saying, and there's a great deal of validity, and if people were to simply just open their eyes and notice those particular instances when things are coming to you, it. To give you a very brief example, because this is somewhat that most people would think, oh, it's somewhat transient or menial and whatnot, but much of what I wrote in my book, Connecting to Love, Unleashing the Power of Yes, and so much of the inspiration out of that book came from plain old lyrics, music that I was listening on the radio. I would get in my car, crank up the ignition, and shoom, there was, a particular song that ignited something. It was a vibration. And a lot of people just dismiss those things, but they're in essence how we receive messages from the universe. How we, it's our very unique way of humming to what's around us. So, go ahead.
I absolutely agree. And I have a fundamental and basic heartfelt opinion about that. I've looked into this aside from the Book of Man for quite some time, looking for examples of it. And I am convinced that there is a universal cornucopia or library of information, knowledge, wisdom, teachings, whatever you want to call it, just simply existing out there.
There is.
And only by our either adherence to opening our eyes to it or accepting it are we allowed, once in an infrequent while, a tip or a piece of that information. Now, everyone, as far as I can understand at this point, are literally thrown a bone once in a while just to see if they're in the game. People get this out of the clear blue. I've actually heard people relate this to me. I stumbled on this idea the other day. I wouldn't have ever thought of this on my own. I got no idea where it came from. Right there is a perfect example of it, because it's happened to myself as well, where I've gotten concepts and ideas out of literally, for lack of a better phrase, the clear blue, that I was neither intending on looking into or even considering. It's like, where did that come from?
Right.
And you have to question that. You have to question that. That's an inherent law of the human species because of our knowledge and what we know or what we should know.
Yeah.
But along those lines, I 100% agree that the tapping into that universal knowledge base, if that's what you want to call it.
Well, it does have a name, but you can call it knowledge base.
Okay.
Or at least there are various names according to metaphysics. You've got the notion of the Akashic field or Akashic record, and then you have other information that refers to it as infinite intelligence. So there are various names, but one of them is fairly known. It's the Akashic records or Akashic field.
Okay. Well, I mean, yes, I've heard references to these topics, but from my perspective, and especially where it relates to what I am doing and what I've done, and being such a verbal junkie, I look at it like a library. I mean, you're standing in front of these stacks of books and books and books, and there's no way you can read all of it. There is no way. You can only grab certain pieces of it here and there and hope at some point in time you can work your way through it. And I know it sounds a little esoteric to some degree, but at the same time, I still firmly believe that there is a delivery of this knowledge to us in some way, shape, or form that's important. It's individually important. It's individually dedicated. And it's also individually specific.
I agree.
I think.
I agree
from
to that.
what I've seen and studied, that throughout the course of history, and this relates back to my being a layman historian, and studying the occurrences of remarkable discoveries and invention throughout humankind, that some of these things came out of the woodwork, that literally appeared for no apparent reason, as if to come from somewhere else. And it had to have been caused that way. And there is record after record after record which proves this point, that how I think it happens is that no one person is given a specific identifier piece of information, that this specific information is scattered amongst several people, and knowing the availability or the level of viewpoint or the level of achievement of a mentality or spiritual growth, can a person accept it, understand it, deal with it, make it happen, and move it? And so there are instances where there have literally been people who have been given knowledge who had neither the time, the resources, the capability to move on it, and it just gets skated over to the next person. And so there is this element. And once again, that's a topic for an entirely other discussion.
Well, at least finish your sentence. There is an element.
There's what?
I said, at least finish your sentence. It seemed like he left it on a cliffhanger.
Well, I stopped abruptly because I could see I was going to ramble there for a minute.
Okay.
No. I think that it's important that people understand that there are no individuals that are lifted up on high on the pillar of knowledge and information above anyone else, though they may achieve that status in a materialistic third density viewpoint. Mm-hmm. It is not their lack or their loss that they don't have that capability. They do. And that's a reinforcement that needs to be talked about, because I think that there may be much quicker, faster transfer of knowledge, invention, and wisdom that could be achieved if only people would wake up to it.
I agree. I was watching Ancient Aliens last night, and one of the topics was Tesla. And look where we are now with the Tesla, as in the Tesla vehicle. But yet that, back in the day when that initially came out, there was no interest, so to speak. And so technology was stifled. So I agree with you in that respect. Going back to the point of where you claim you were about to start rambling, what I notice is a very fervent, passion about this work or about this information. So where does that come from?
Well, there has been a discussion by a few select people whose names I will leave out at the moment, only because as an enticement for those to start looking into it. Mm. But they actually used the vocal words that I needed to hear. And that was that this information is freely and readily available to everyone. But you have to be open to it. That doesn't mean, you're blinded from it. You don't have to graduate high school to get this. You don't have to have a PhD on the wall. I mean, there is no defining level of situation that's going to enhance your ability or capability to get this information. But I think it's a personal situation. It's your level of understanding that achieves this. I have noticed over the last several decades a seeming increase in the reception of information of this nature that I would never have dreamt of. And it's only because I've become open to it. I have no privy knowledge or specialized talent or skill that would warrant getting this stuff. Uh, but like I said, once you cross that threshold, um, things start to fly pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there has been several suggestions about this philosophy. It used to be called something a long time ago. I hate to use the phrase because it's going to turn some people off, but it used to be referred to as the vision of the seven veils. And what this refers to is an individual's capability to not only sight, but understand the reception of certain concepts and knowledge. That doesn't make them any less smarter, doesn't make them any more stupid, doesn't make them any way, shape, or form less or more than anyone else. It just means a person's capability to receive this knowledge. It's a point of fact. You can sit and argue or debate a point in a public room with several people over a topic that you are absolutely convinced you know as much as you can possibly say about it, and yet they refuse to accept it. That doesn't mean they're argumentative or debateful. That just means they don't get it. There's a point there that should be made. Mm-hmm. It is not their fault. They just don't have the capability to see it. And I think there is an inherent problem in sight. This has been a foundational issue with our species for a long time now. Trying to get people to move past this sight issue is a long-running one.
Well, a lot of that is part of 3D, third dimension, or third density. I don't know if you're familiar, and I think we've exchanged information a little bit on email about the Law of One, which I recommended highly that you read or look into. But the Law of One speaks very, very clearly about why that is, and it has to do with what's referred to as the veil of forgetting. And when you used the word veil a minute ago, and I could not paraphrase what you just said, but anyway, there was an actual veil put into the third density, and not until you do progression into fourth and fifth density that veil begins to shed, and that's why we begin to be more able and available to that information, the receiving of that information. And that has to do, what's interesting about that, Bryan, it has to do with the photon. It has to do with light, how we are opening or closing our ability to receive the light, because light is information. And so that's simply the mechanism that's taking place, and why there is that somewhat of a block when you're speaking to someone and they're just like, hazed. They don't get it.
Of course, absolutely correct. And light makes a considerable quantitative position in that element, mm-hmm. because the human brain at the moment is the receiver, mm-hmm. of our light source through our eyes. Our eyes are just lenses. That's all they are. Our eyes have nothing to do with understanding. They have nothing to do with what you see or what you feel. It is the conceptual materialization of the human brain that deciphers that information. Therefore, it logically exists that at some point in time, that your ability to perceive light in differing levels acquires certain pieces of information, mm-hmm. which your brain therefore has to deal with. So it's sort of like a catch-22. On the one hand, you're restricted by your brain's capacity to analyze that information, and then yet your ability to actually perceive it. Right. How you cross that threshold, there's an argument in and of itself.
Yeah. my my personal opinion, this is just opinion, is that it's a matter of positioning. In other words, you basically position yourself to a yes, or you position yourself to a no. That's all there is to it. And it's just, that's where free will comes into play. You can say, yes, I'm going to look at this, regardless of how ridiculous it might be. It's a yes. You open up, suddenly all the mechanisms say, whoa! Okay, we'll take it in. Or you say no to it. Speak to them.
Well, and the funny part, this isn't really funny, but to me it is, and to anyone who gets it will think it's funny. That's actually the funny part of it, is that those of us who can see find it humorous that those who can't see refuse to accept it.
Yeah.
And that's not meant to be a detrimental statement on anyone.
No.
Not really. This isn't meant to be a bigoted, racist type of call. That's not the point. And I apologize if it comes across that way to anyone. No, it is not. But at the same time, you have to be heartfelt and sincerely almost hurt and punished, because you cannot help them to see and understand. And therein again is another problem, because this is where I fall back to why the Book of Man exists in the first place. It is not the goal to bring anyone kicking and screaming into the forward evolution of our species, but it is designed to at least question or promote the question amongst those people who can't see or understand this information, to at least start questioning or looking into it enough to maybe lift that veil just a smidgen. And that's all you need. You just get that veil up one little tick around the corner and the gate's open. Trust me.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Once, basically all it needs is it's an inch, like you say. And then curiosity just basically takes over. So what other means of dissemination of this information aside from Vimeo have you offered? Is that the only place where you have it accessible?
At the moment, yes. Originally, I had intended this for YouTube. At the time, though, I was running into issues with YouTube over the length of these pieces, and so I had been a long-standing member with Vimeo for quite some time, as long as YouTube, by the way. And I fell back to Vimeo simply because it's got a higher degree of imaging, and actually, it's quite a warm and fuzzy place, by the way. Actually, some of the staff and users on Vimeo aided me in the production of this, which would never have happened on YouTube. Mm-hmm. I had wished to have the venue available to put it on maybe a directed website or some other platform in that form. I've actually been consulted to monetize this. At this point in time, I have no desire to monetize it, simply because the existence of the material as it stands right now is only simply produced by me. None of the content is original. Mm-hmm. And therefore, out of respect for the content providers and their work, I would be remiss to start monetizing this. Sure. Even though I own the rights to the book. Mm-hmm. Now, as far as that's concerned, I've actually been asked by someone who lives in an Eastern European country to send them a transcript because they don't speak English all that well and they wish to have it translated. Um, uh, I haven't yet approached the position of having this translated into multiple languages yet. Um, I had to explain to them the fact that the book exists long before the video series appeared, and I haven't even crossed the threshold yet of language translation.
Is the book actually published, or you just have that available on a PDF? How is the book available? I've not seen the book, by the way.
No, and you won't. Not at the moment. I sent a message to a friend of mine not too long ago that the attempts at publication of this book failed miserably. No serious, even alternative publisher would touch it with a 10-meter cattle prod, which I find disturbing, because some of the very publications that they are selling openly on open forums like Amazon.com, among others, carry authors and artists of alternative nature. Mm-hmm. And yet none of them responded, would not even discuss it. Mm-hmm. And what few attempts I've attempted on my own to publish the material out of my own pocket have failed miserably because, well, I'm not independently wealthy and have no real desire to. But there is a fairly serious story behind how the Vimeo production appeared, and if you wish to get into that, I can. But
sure, just give us a little bit of an overview.
Well,
that way everybody understands the pains you've taken into getting this information out there.
Originally, I was laid off from work for a fair time in 2010, and the book was already pretty much done. I mean, as far as the outline and the notes are concerned, it was all in place, ready to go. And during this time, I actually sat down and literally hammered the entire book out within, I'd say, 30 to 45 days. It came out that fast. I mean, it was like nonstop. It flowed like running water. But, like I said,
you were tuned in, tapped in.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And the attempts to try to get it published failed, like I said, miserably. Well, I had a friend of mine, I'm going to leave his name out because that's not important at the moment, who was already a notable author and a respected researcher. And him and I spoke on the phone several times about this book, and he wanted to see it because our discussions, you know, covering the topics and what it was about and what it was covering, he was fascinated by. And he even told me, he said, man, I want to see this book. I really do. Well, long story short, he passed away last December 2013. And that literally crushed me because he was such an important person, such an important character on the stage of human knowledge and information. And it literally broke my heart that he passed, and never having had a chance to see this. And so it was at that point that I said, that's it. I basically threw the gloves down. It's over. And so this was my attempt to get it out in the public view once and for all, because I was not going to lose one more person without it.
That speaks a lot of your passion, which was my question a little while ago. Where does that passion come from? And that you've just answered now the question. It sounds as though you have a very fervent desire to get others to comprehend the magnitude, not just of this information, but on a global scale, how it can contribute to the quality of one's life.
At this point, I have to say this, that I have over the course of the last several months actually sat through and rewatched the entire series dozens and dozens of times, for the sole fact of trying to hone my editing skills and learning production as best I can under the circumstances, and basically critiquing my own work. But at the same time, I'm finding that no matter how hard I try, I am finding fewer and fewer holes in this story. And this is something I'd like to put forward to your listeners, is that as much as I have tried myself to nitpick and poke holes in this story, I have yet to find them. I mean, there's a vast amount of potential for nitpicking here.
Mm-hmm.
Believe you me, I've already witnessed some of it. But as far as the broad picture is concerned, this story is bulletproof. Um, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, only because this was an accidental discovery over time, in that the delivery of the story basically told itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, I was responsible for hammering it, so to speak, but the story itself existed long before I ever touched it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can only take a mention for being partially involved at this point.
Well, you certainly did a very good job of compiling it. I'll say that much, and I will agree that the story has very little holes in it. And the reason I'm saying that with the complete and utter confidence is because I've read The Law of One, and in The Law of One also mentions many pieces of the story with accuracy. In the source of The Law of One is definitely I'm trying to find the correct way to articulate that source, but certainly believable. The information comes from a fairly reliable, believable source. So that's all I can say about it until you are more familiar with what I'm referring to in The Law of One, and for those who are not familiar with The Law of One. But
Denise, I've glanced at The Law of One. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly digest it yet. I apologize for that.
no.
I will put it's on my list. I will get to it in my limited amount of time.
Pretty amazing, and you will find how it will, if any holes in your story, it will be able to to give you a solid understanding that what you have in the Book of Man is very reliable. So just for your own edifying information, I believe that was what you've put together is very good.
In defense of an open and public debate,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something else that I will stand firm on, by the way, and I will refuse to argument this, is that that's part of the reason why this work exists, to help provide a public and open debate.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I've actually been told by a few viewers, that they knew about this material all along. They just wanted to see it for themselves. And I've been told by a few of these folks that they knew of this research material a long time ago, and that it simply confirmed what they were wanting to see the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were glad somebody actually stepped forward and put it on the table.
Yeah. And you put it in sequential order, but
yet
I've
actually.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I said you put it in sequential order very well, but you've also condensed it in such a way that it's not so overwhelming. Even though it's chock full of information, it's not so terribly overwhelming as to say sit down for 5 or 6 hours or even days on end and just read and read and read. It's very compact.
Technically speaking, Denise, yes, this is why I keep referring to this as History 101.
Mm-hmm.
It may appear simplistic to some people, but just so that you know, and you made a valid point there, by the way. Um, Basically, just so you know, uh, when I initially started the actual writing of this book, the footnote references that I had decided to include in the book were literally hitting at 4 and 5 footnotes per sentence. Now, if I had completed the book under that format, it would have literally been thousands of pages long just by the references. And so this is why I opted out of references and footnotes within the book, is because it would have been incomprehensible. It would have taken away from the story, from the telling of the story, which I thought was more important.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I'm glad to, in as much as I would have liked to seen the references, because I'm just a person who is inclined to doing research of my own, and having the references, all it does is allow me or the reader or whoever to, skip right into it. In other words, not have to go on a tailspin of, well, where did that information come from? Because likely you wouldn't find it. I mean, it's because it's not mainstream. It's very difficult to find. So it would have been nice to have seen the references. But at the same time, I understand. I get it, why you opted not to have that.
I mentioned that in the beginning of the book that reference footnotes were avoided. And it wasn't meant to conceal the information. Once again, I didn't pull this from the Vatican archives or from a top secret hidden Alexandrian destroyed library archive files or anything of that nature. A point of fact, a whole folder of information came from a little known website in South America by a gentleman who his sole job and all he was trying to do was just document UFO contact events globally. A very serious piece of work, by the way. None of it connected, none of it related, none of it really means much of anything unless you sit through it. And we're talking page after page after page after page. And over the course of time, just so the listeners understand about the research process and the finding similarities within certain pieces and fragments of information, I literally came across a vast amount of work from very many different sources over differing topics, completely unconnected. And yet the similarities were so startling to me. I found it amazing how these people weren't talking to one another, sharing this information. And so basically that's what I've done here, is I've taken all of this obscure data from many, many different sources. I listed them actually in the postscript. That you have to sift. I mean, there's a tea strainer effect here. There's no other way around it. It may seem laborious and redundant to some extent, but you have to separate the wheat from the chaff, and only by this endeavor can you actually hone it down to a specific metal. And there's the rub right there. Yes, I've actually gotten comments already screaming at me about listing my references, and at this point, I will openly admit I'm going to refuse to, because that's not the purpose. That's not the purpose of the book. The purpose is to drive individual research. Everything that's said within the book, within the work, is easily identifiable and searchable under whatever criteria you feel necessary. And if you can't find a resource or a reference to support any specific item within this work, then my only suggestion at that point is maybe to start looking somewhere else.
Yeah. You know, and there is some validity to, are you there?
Yeah, yeah.
There is some validity to taking that particular stance. It's almost, the way I see it, it's almost like parenthood. If you put everything on a silver platter and give it to your child, will they ever learn to endeavor on their own? And so I think part of the understanding and the knowledge is the acquisition of that information through one's own means.
Let me address that real quickly, not to deviate from our discussion here. But the silver platter problem, or also what I refer to as the silver spoon problem.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this out loud, and anyone who feels it necessary can document this and write it down and come hit me with it later if you feel like it. But there is no one single answer to any problem, and there isn't. In other words, if you have a question about UFOs, you are not going to find one document or one video or one report that iconically states unequivocally that this is the answer to this issue. There is no single answer to any of it. And likewise, there is no single answer to the Book of Man. Not one. Not anywhere. This isn't meant to be an answer to people's questions. I've actually, and I referred to this earlier when we first started this discussion about cherry picking chapters. I've noticed over the viewership over the course of several months that people are landing on certain chapters based solely off of their identifiable story or what it is they're looking for, hoping in some way, shape, or form for an answer, an easy, single answer. And I'm going to fall back on this. There is no one answer. I don't have it. I don't know anybody who does. But I do know that there are many people covering many different areas of research who provide a piece of the answer. And I think that is part of what the discussion should be about, not why this is not the end of the answer.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, this is only just sort of the pique the interest type of thing, or the open the door into, open the garage door, let's take a look at what's inside the garage. So, Bryan, we've been chatting for exactly 1 hour, 20 minutes, and 29 seconds. What would you like to tell the viewers in closing? Do you have any specific words you'd like to offer or address, or? I would like to offer this. After having worked on this for some time now, and having enjoyed literally the excitement and the enjoyment of others over this work, and there has been a considerable amount. There's been more excitement and enjoyment over this work than negative. I find that amazing, personally. But what I will tell people is this. Go ahead and watch it from start to finish. I mean, personally, I would not go to Amazon.com, buy a book, and then start at page 200, and read one chapter, and then make my entire decision based off of that one chapter. You're going to miss pieces of information. You're going to miss its relationship to the entire story. That's what I would suggest. Whether you think you have the time available or it's pertinent, that's your own personal choice. But I'm going to suggest to watch it all the way through from start to finish before you make a decision or a judgment. And then I would suggest at a later date, rewatch it once again, because I've already been told people have discovered secrets within the book that they had missed the first time. And believe me, there are little tiny secrets hidden within the book on purpose for that very reason. and I agree that watching it a second time is viable. Um, I think part of it is when something is so foreign to you, you at first it's almost like a shock, a shock wave. So you're opening yourself just to, at first blush to what's available. And then once you kind of had an opportunity to sort of let it percolate a little bit through the processing system, then you're a little bit more open to the meat and potatoes. So almost a second layer of information. So I wholeheartedly agree, and that's so. Well, I certainly appreciate your time and energy. It's been delightful chatting with you, and I hope we're able to do this again on a follow-up of some sort. Hopefully, something positive comes out of it, and I will be in touch with you to put together something that will potentially get published on Huffington Post, and cross our fingers that they're kind enough and open-minded enough that this can be exposed, or at least presented. And I'm just tickled pink that we've been able to do this morning. Thank you.
Well, Denise, thank you. No, thank you for taking the time and interest to sit through the debacle, which is my dissertations, and I've tried to be as honest and forthright as possible. I mean, I'm not holding anything back. I have no reason to lie or hide anymore.
Yeah.
I've gotten to an age now where I don't really care anymore what other people think. That's not to mean that I don't respect other people's opinions. I just don't. I don't let it shape my viewpoint. And so I very much appreciate some of the sincere questions you've asked. A couple of them quite tough, by the way. But absolutely, very heartfelt thank you. And anytime I would be more than willing to be open to a follow-up, as you suggested. That's great. I'm absolutely speechless at the moment, and that's hard to do, even for me.
Well, hopefully on a follow-up, maybe we can delve a little bit more into specifics without tipping toe around the topic. I think, I was a little reluctant to just, blabber up whatever the topic is, simply because I don't want to discourage anyone from viewing it. I think sometimes it's so easy to have so many directives and impressions and information that you end up, oh, okay, well, I got it, so now I know it, so now I can just skip it. And so, I wanted to be sure that we didn't tippy-toe for the purposes of obscurity, but simply because there is no need for us to do that when everything is so beautifully, outlined in the work that you've already done. So, but we'll certainly have to do it again.
Oh, absolutely, and I appreciate that comment. That I get a little misty. That's very nice of you to say that. And I don't think we tiptoed around the issues. No, we did not clarify specific events within the book.
That's what I was referring to.
Specific stories. I mean, we could literally run another 6-hour program just on the stories, which I would be more than happy to go into.
Yeah.
And well, maybe we could monetize that one, because ain't nobody making money off this one, sweetheart.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will really, really be interested in, and let me just put it out there for you to kind of get those wheels going. One thing that was of utmost curiosity to me, and at the end of the books, you gave a great deal of credit to Alex Collier, who has had a great input of information into what you have done. But having being familiar with his work as well, one thing I know is that he mentions 22 races that have gone into what is the creation of man. And I was not, I mean, obviously you didn't outline it very, very specifically with names, and you explained why, and I respect that, and I can appreciate why you did it that way. But I was not able to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, oh, okay, I got all 22 of them in the transcourse of what you did. And so I would love to, and obviously that might be easier said than done. It may be that's not quite possible, but I would love at some point if we could really figure that out. What are those 22 races?
That's a very good subject. Believe me, I stewed on that for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. There were many, many races. In fact, the numbers I have seen exceed 22 by at least double, maybe triple. And I spent a great deal of time, and let me tell you the process, how this worked. I saw descriptions and locations and events by certain races over time, and I literally took this list and wrote them on little 3x5 cards, threw them on the floor, and only over the course of time trying to align them within some respectable storyline did it occur to me that of all of these races that are referred to by many, many people, Alex Collier being one, by the way, are very similar. Maybe not even so much similar as, dare I say, the same. And so I pinpointed a position of racial archetype based off of the descriptors that I had available at the time. And what I narrowed it down to is the ones I presented in this work. Now, there have been arguments to this date, and I'll say this out loud and freely because it's already been pointed out to me. My usage of the descriptions of the Draconian Empire is already been called heinously wrong, because there are like 11 different species of them. Well, that's possible, but the Draconian Empire still exists, and their functionality and their relationship in this story is what it is. Mm-hmm. So I reduced it to its basest level for the telling of this story. Now, people may take offense to that, but I'm sorry. For convenience and continuity's sake, this is how it went. Now, there are actually, as far as I understand it, even through Alex Collier, that there are races of man who are completely outside the realm of the race of man, who are negative, who have alternative agendas, who have other things going on. And yet, at the same time, they are still of the race of man. Now, if we could have, like I said, we could have diverged in the work into those little subtext storylines, mm-hmm. but it would have diverted from the entire story as a whole. Yeah. And so I whittled it down to its basis level. Once again, I'll take the beating for that. That was my judgment call in editing. But yes, you're absolutely correct. The numbers of races is phenomenal. This is why I spent so much time in the preface talking about the 1% rule, mm-hmm. about the numbers of civilizations that are potentially existent in this galaxy. I mean, it goes far and wide beyond anything we even understand at the moment. So, yes, that's a topic for a later
One
day.
Source I have has told me that there's well over 500 of those civilizations out there.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
I would bet your paycheck on it.
Yeah. I don't got one, but
I'm sorry. I always say that. One time I was actually asked by someone, how sincerely do you believe that? And I said, I'll bet your paycheck on it and they backed away immediately. That's only an argumentative comment, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I took a liberty there.
Oh, absolutely. I have a fairly good sense of humor, so I take no offense. But yeah, definitely I could see that there are areas that could be expanded for a number of other volumes of sequels and of what you've already started on, and certainly a sequel to this interview.
Oh, absolutely. In keeping with the continuity of the story, um, I guess on a closing note, I need to make this a fairly vocal point. Is that this is not meant, and I said this in the book, and I'll stand by this one as well. This is not meant to be the end all of this story. It never was meant to be. Once again, this is just like 101. Okay? Once you get past this point, then we start working on other presentations. Just so you know, Denise, there were portions of this story I literally edited out because it diverged from the storyline and there's no historical references to place it within this timeline sufficiently enough to warrant it. And I've already been called on that one too. Personally, I am a big purveyor of the theory of Maldek, the alleged fifth planet. Mm-hmm. I wish to include that, but unfortunately,
There's no data out there.
There's no data out there.
Well, you will find it. You will find it in the Loft one.
Well, I'm sure they have information.
Yeah.
But as far as a timeline or a degree of transversing the course of time in the broad picture, there is no track record. There's no direct pathway to that topic. That's the reason why I edited it out of my own story, and that's a sore point for me because I actually firmly believe that that's the only reason the asteroid belt even exists there to this day, and that's common knowledge at this point.
Well, there's certainly a lot of pieces that we will need to be inquisitive about and potentially create a better, overview or construct of what has gone right below our nose, and we just haven't quite perceived it. But needless to say, here we are, and it's been a joy having this conversation with you, and we'll see where we go with it.
Very good, Denise, and to your listeners, love and light.
Absolutely.
And just pay attention. That's all we can ask.
Absolutely. That goes without saying. Well, thank you, Bryan. You have a wonderful day.
You too.
Love and light to you.